is vital. A temple, a site in antiquity, which we still have today, is something which has been created at a specific time and through the land. The messages of the land and the people and the feelings of the people of the time and their civilization. It's the expression of that crystallization of a specific time. So, environment is especially important for the Parthenon marbles.
The big encyclopedic museums of the West were established in the 18th and 19th centuries. At that time, laws regarding antiquities were very different from today, and the big museums and private collectors with money behind them took advantage of the situation to enrich their growing collections with cultural cornerstones from other countries. Some of the transactions were legal at the time, but would never pass today under modern laws. Some were downright criminal, both then and now. And some fell into a gray area, which are now difficult to resolve, such as in the case of the Parthenon marbles that were taken from Athens in the beginning of the 19th century. Lord Elgin, the British ambassador to the Ottoman Empire, removed unique sculptures from the Temple of Acropolis and shipped them to Scotland, where he decorated his home with them. Later, they were sold to Great Britain and placed in the British Museum, where they have remained for over 2 centuries. When Greece broke free from the crumbling Ottoman Empire in 1830, one of their first demands was the repatriation of the Parthenon marbles. Britain flatly refused. This conflict between Greece and Britain has been ongoing ever since. The British Museum displays about half of the remaining Parthenon marbles. The new Acropolis Museum displays the other half. The missing marbles are represented by white plaster copies. The difference is very noticeable.
The Greek authorities pursue the issue of the return of the Parthenon marbles because the Parthenon is a unique symbolic monument. It is a monument which affects our life. It is the symbol of Western civilization. It's a World Heritage Monument, and it inspires people today. It is what we base our lives on because democracy, liberty of expression, the struggle of man for his supremacy, this is what we believe in. So, of course, such a symbolic monument ended up as the logo of UNESCO. And this makes everyone realize that this is not just any case. It is not a precedent. It is not just any monument. It is a symbol, a higher symbol of values. And this is what we need to go on in our lives, inspiration.
So the British Museum exists to tell the story of human history from 2 million years ago to the present day. And its value, we think its value, its public benefit is in the world collection that is held at the British Museum. That here at the museum you can come and see objects from all cultures throughout time. And that there's a great public benefit in terms of people being able to come and experience that collection, to compare and contrast cultures, to see objects from their own cultures and others, and understand their place within the world. So in that context, we feel that it's vital that objects such as the Parthenon sculptures are represented as an example, extraordinary example of the cultural achievement of ancient Greece.
So the Greek authorities have not decided to ask for the return of any other antiquity from the time, let's say, of Elgin, only the Parthenon marbles, so that they can come back and be next to the monument from which they came and which they adorn as integral parts, and where the whole notion of the Parthenon is building and sculptures together. You can't have half the sculptures here and the building there. It is not as complete as we can have it. So the Greek authorities have understood that by now they're requesting the return of the Parthenon marbles, actually the reunification, because the main issue is reunifying the marbles that exist here with what exists in the British Museum, so that the head is not lying in London and the body here. We have to make it as a whole working together. The Greeks will not ask for the caryatid, they will not ask for the column of the Erechtheum, even though that too was removed by Elgin, because we're only speaking about reunifying the Parthenon, the symbol of Western civilization.
So we understand, obviously, that these are objects that attract a lot of attention and a lot of debate. Different people have different views about where the objects should be seen, where the remaining objects should be seen. We have very good relationships with our colleagues in Greece. Curatorially, there's a lot of exchange, there's a lot of research work that goes on, so that scholars, both within the UK and in Greece, can understand these wonderful objects better. In terms of official relationships, the Greek government has obviously asked for the permanent return of the material that's held in this gallery back to Greece. The trustees of the British Museum have declined that request. They have said, obviously, that they are, as with any object in the museum, happy to consider loan requests that may be received. But to date, we haven't had a loan request from Greece to see some of these objects there, though we do lend to Greece at other times. So that's really the situation at the moment. As you know, there are only about 50% of the Parthenon sculptures survive from antiquity. 50% of them were destroyed long before the arrival of Lord Elgin. And of the remaining 50%, about half are here in London and about half are in Greece in the New Acropolis Museum. And we think that there is a great benefit for the public in that. You can see examples of these sculptures in the Acropolis Museum, close by where they were originally housed, and you can tell the story of the importance of ancient Athens. And here in the British Museum, you can see other examples which tell a much wider story, a much more global world story. And we think that that's of great benefit to the world. But that's the situation, really, that at the moment the request has been made, and it's a long-standing request, but it's not one that the trustees have agreed to.
Αυτό είναι ένα μνημείο μοναδικό. Είναι δυνατόν να το βλέπει κανένας αποσπασματικά, να δει μερικά κομμάτια του εδώ και να πάει στο Λονδίνο να δει τα άλλα ή με αντίστροφη σειρά? Είναι αδιανόητο. Δεν χρειάζεται, δηλαδή πιστεύουμε ότι αν επικρατήσει για μια στιγμή λογική, καλοπιστία, αναγνώριση μιας πραγματικότητας που την έχουν όλοι οι λαοί. Όλοι οι λαοί έχουν μνημεία και όλοι οι λαοί δεν εξουσιοδοτούν κανέναν να τα μεταβιβάζει, να τα πουλάει, να τα τεμαχίζει. Κανένας. Είναι αδιανόητο να πεις σε οποιοδήποτε λαό ότι θα πάρω τα μνημεία σου για να τα πάω. Αυτή είναι η πλευρά, η πολιτική, η ηθική, η σύμφωνη με τη μοντέρνα αντίληψη, αυτή που ανέκυψε μετά τον Δεύτερο Παγκόσμιο Πόλεμο, για την προστασία της κοινής πολιτιστικής κληρονομιάς. Τα μνημεία ανήκουν σε όλους. Πέρα από σύνορα, είναι σε όποιον τα επισκέπτεται, είναι η δόξα του παρελθόντος, η οποία παρακινεί στο παρόν να συνεχίσει ένα ακόμη καλύτερο δρόμο προόδου.
I'm Paul Cartledge, I'm the Vice Chairman of the British Committee, which was funded and founded pretty much after Melina Mercouri, then the culture minister in the PASOK government in Greece in the 80s, came over to Britain and made a very striking declaration, forceful, powerful plea that the marbles, it was almost as if my children have been wandering around all these years and they should come home. But of course, what she didn't have as an argument was a museum, a dedicated museum in which they would find their rightful place. We all agreed that there's no point in even thinking about putting whatever survives back on the original building. But a great deal of the original building does survive, and it's within eyesight and eyeshot of this fantastic new state-of-the-art New Acropolis Museum. So why did I join? I'm a historian of ancient Greece. I'm an archaeologist partly by training, and I'm extremely keen that the artworks should be whole. At the moment they are dismembered, and I use this analogy, it's rather inexact, but suppose a painting of Leonardo's were to be cut in half, and half was in Paris and half was in Milan. Well, it's sort of like that, of what survives from the original building, not nearly the whole, but let's say 80% of the sculptural members, the British Museum owns about half of that. They claim to own it, and the Greeks possess roughly half of what survives. That seemed to me ridiculous. And in the last 30, 35 years, the Greeks, the archaeologists, have developed an amazingly sophisticated way of investigating every possible scrap of remain, using, as science develops new techniques, infrared photography, for example, we now know what colors we used in the paint on the skin, all that. Fantastic center, and yet what we're faced with in Britain, in London, is a very, very poor display, which doesn't do justice to even what they have. And in my view, they shouldn't have what they have anyway.
So the British Museum is governed by a board of trustees. So they are the group of people that hold the collection in trust for the nation. So it's owned by the whole of the UK. And they are the people that, as I say, govern the museum, that respond to loan requests or requests that come in regarding objects and in the British Museum's collection. So they operate on the basis of the British Museum Act, which obviously there was an original British Museum Act and then it was renewed in 1963. And that British Museum Act does state that the museum is not able to return any objects in its collection. So there is a legal basis for not being able to return the objects. But in addition to that, ideologically, the museum feels, and the trustees feel, absolutely committed to this idea about the value and the benefit of the world collection, and that the Parthenon sculptures are a vital part of that mission to deliver that public benefit.
The museums have often used the property laws of their own countries to justify keeping artifacts acquired abroad. However, there are ways to work around such laws, as in the case of Denmark returning medieval manuscripts to Iceland after having kept them for centuries in Copenhagen. The ownership remains Danish, but the loan is permanent. This is understood by both parties, and nobody expects the manuscripts to be returned to Denmark.
The vandalism is that in order to free the metopiece and the sculptures, they had to demolish the walls of the monument. Basically, they destroy all the upper structure of the Parthenon in order to remove the metopiece. They destroy the triglyphs, they destroy the gason, and they destroy all the Thranos blocks, but they are forming the roof in order to liberate the metopiece and to take them. Many other travelers in the 18th and 19th century, they took antiquities from Greece, but they didn't destroy the monuments. They dug, they discovered the sculptures, they took them, and they left. In the Parthenon case, they destroy the monument in order to get the sculptures. If I dare to compare the destruction of the Parthenon monument with a similar destruction that happened in our generation, I have to say that it's comparable with what happened to Syria, to Iraq, and to Palmyra lately.
Η αρπαγή των μαρμάρων από τον Έλλην είχε πάντοτε χαρακτηριστεί διεθνώς ως μια εντελώς παράνομη πράξη. Και ήταν παράνομη πράξη. Μην ξεχνάμε ότι η αρπαγή αυτή γίνεται μετά την ακμή του διαφωτισμού, το 18ο αιώνα, και το 19ο ολοκληρώνεται με την πώληση εν συνεχεία των γλυπτών. Ήταν γενικός κανόνας που ίσχυε από τότε και εξακολουθεί να ισχύει ως τώρα. Ότι τα πολιτιστικά αγαθά, ιδίως αυτά που έχουν μεγάλη αξία, συμβολική και ουσιαστική, όπως είναι ο Παρθενώνας, δεν θέτουν ζήτημα ιδιοκτησίας, θέτουν ζήτημα πράγματι να δούμε τη φύση τους. Δεν υπάρχει στα πολιτιστικά αγαθά μείζωνος σημασίας, δεν υπάρχει έννοια της ιδιοκτησίας με την έννοια ο κύριος του πράγματος, ο ιδιοκτήτης, το διαθέτει όπως θέλει. Δεν υπάρχει, είναι πράγματα, όπως χαρακτηρίζονται νομικά, εκτός συναλλαγής. Extra commercium, κατά την λατινική έκφραση.
The trustees of the British Museum have always said, as they do about any object in the museum's collection, that they would happily consider any loan request that would come through, and the decision would be made subject to the object's fitness to travel and so on. But I think the critical thing here is that a loan request makes an assumption that the country or the museum that is asking for the loan accepts the museum's ownership of that object. So in this instance, that's why discussions about loans have been difficult, because the Greek government don't accept the British Museum's legal title to the Parthenon sculptures that are in our collection. We have lent examples of sculptures from the Parthenon in the past. In 2014, we lent a sculpture of Elissos to the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg for a limited period loan of around 3 months. And obviously it went with the Hermitage acknowledgement that it was owned by the trustees of the British Museum and was returned. So on that basis, we obviously would be very happy to have discussions around lending some of the objects within the Parthenon sculptures, but it's difficult to have that discussion whilst there is a question mark over the legal title of the trustees' ownership of these objects.
Το να πάρεις τα γλυπτά του Παρθενώνα, να τα αφαιρέσεις, να τα καθαιρέσεις και να τα μεταφέρεις στην Αγγλία για ιδιωτική περιουσία ενός ανθρώπου, ο οποίος με τη σειρά του τα πουλάει σε ένα μουσείο, είναι αδιανόητο, ήταν αδιανόητο. Δεν έγινε σε μια εποχή σκοτεινών χρόνων. Έγινε σε μια εποχή που υπήρχαν τα σύγχρονα κράτη δικαίου που διέπονται από την νομιμότητα. Ποτέ δεν μπορεί να νοηθεί σοβαρά, σκεφτείτε το, όποιο μνημείο, σε οποιοδήποτε μέρος της γης, να μπορεί η κυβέρνησή του να το πουλήσει. Δεν γίνεται, ή να δώσει άδεια να το πάρουν και να το χρησιμοποιήσουν όπως θέλουν. Αυτό δεν ήταν απλά, όπως λέμε τυπικά, παράνομη πράξη, έγκλημα. Ήταν κάτι πολύ χειρότερο, ήταν ένα ιστορικό λάθος, το οποίο εκκρεμεί και πρέπει να διορθωθεί.
When Britain bought the Parthenon marbles from Lord Elgin in 1816, the matter was so controversial that it was debated in the British Parliament. After much discussion, the Parliament formally approved the acquisition. In the minds of many, that makes it legal.
And you know, I'm looking in June 1816, when the House was debating, things, and Mr. Hugh Hammersley made the first recorded proposal for the return of the marbles with this very specific amendment saying that Great Britain holds these marbles only in trust till they are demanded by the present or any future possessors of the city of Athens, and upon such demand engages without question or negotiation to restore them as far as can be effected to the places from whence they were taken, and that they shall be in the meantime carefully preserved in the British Museum.
That puts it beautifully.
It does, and so the British Museum has been the best nanny in the world. It has brought the baby up, and now the baby is prepared to walk. It should go home.
It was in 1687 where it was under the Ottoman Empire, and they have occupied Athens, and they used the temple, to have all their the arsenal for armory and so on. So it was blown up, and all the temple was blown up, and we have one Danish naval officer was part of this Venetian army, actually, which blew up the temple, and he bought these two heads. And then he thought it was very nice. I don't know if he even knew it was from Parthenon. But even though he did, he went back to the Danish king and he gave it to him. For more than 300 years now, they have been a part of the royal Danish collection, and then as a part of the founding of the National Museum. So now we have these two heads. And they haven't been asking for them. And we are proud of presenting them. And this is also introduction to this beautiful and magnificent temple in Athens for us. I know there's this international discussion, but I think at least you have to take it case by case. This is a very special case. And there have been a lot of discussion. Is that illegal for the time that the Elgin bought them? Or is it not illegal? And there's a lot of discussion. But what we can agree on is that this layer of stories, it is the most important temple in Greece and have been it for a long time. It is an important part of Greece history that it was for so many centuries was part of an Ottoman Empire. And it is important that we are in war often and old temples are blown up. They are not just deterring themselves, they are maybe part of wars. So and it is of course also a story that these two has become an important part of our collection story. So there's all these layers. And of course we can if we should make an agreement that we should return every object to its very origin, then we will miss all these opportunities to tell all the other stories. So they are, of course, they are important on their own. So what I hope for is that we can share this story. I know I have seen, of course, the new museum in Athens, and it's wonderful. I mean, and I don't. So they have, at least, even though they don't have the original marbles, they have the original temple, and so I think we have getting along with that problem that now there are several countries sharing this wonderful temple in Acropolis.
When Greece was liberated, the first thing that it did was to start restoration of the Acropolis. That means that the whole Acropolis was very symbolic to the Greeks. So the Greek state, from its very beginning, immediately gave funding for the restoration, conservation, and works in general on the Acropolis. And this has gone on through the years as the peak priority. Whatever else may have come to light all throughout Greece, however, the greatest priority and the highest funding goes to the Acropolis. Not only the Parthenon, of course, but all its monuments. And it may sound very strange, But one would think that everything is discovered. No, it is not. Actually, there are excavations being done all around the rock of the Acropolis, and can you imagine that new material is being found? Pieces from the Parthenon itself that were sent far away from the explosion of Morosini, for example. We find them. We find members attached in several walls during some construction, and we gather new elements every day. So the Acropolis is an open workshop. It's not a site which is already, in a sense, dead. Like a museum which has 5, 10, 90 pieces, like in the case of the Parthenon marbles in the British Museum. Nothing can be added to that. Here we find new pieces, and to be able to attach and spot where a little piece fits, it is evident that we would need all the Parthenon frieze, all the metopies, all the pedimental sculptures to have the original material and see the cut and the edge and where maybe this new little piece should fit in. So it's for the benefit of scholarship, and this is active today. It's good to participate in an activity which is ongoing. And when one thinks that metopies which were considered lost because so many pieces were lying around, and now we have them in the new Acropolis Museum because they were reattached, and we have new material. So this is the glory of research, of scholarship, and this is where it's happening every day.
Cultural heritage is obviously, understandably, a very hot topic, and it is something that is always going to interest people. There is always going to be a question about where particular objects belong. But I think from the museum's perspective, what we would try to say is that, again, there is this benefit in having, with these world museums, these places where you can come and experience different cultures under one roof, and that the objective is really that we use cultural heritage, or we think about using cultural objects to understand each other better. So one of the fundamental things about what the British Museum is trying to do is taking outside the political sphere is just to make people understand a little better about particular countries.
There's no other building, to my knowledge, standing from the ancient world, still standing from the ancient world, where you can see the scars of that robbery, that destructive act, to this very day. They don't exist. I mean, some criminals have blown up part of Palmyra, and that's one of the hazards of ignorance and brutality. But the buildings are still there in Syria. And we don't have a major piece of Syrian architecture where the building still stands, nor Assyrian, as I understand it,
Correct.
nor Egyptian. They, the things that held these objects have gone with the depredations of time. But the Parthenon stands devoid of its glories. And so no trustee of the British Museum could possibly argue a floodgate, since it's so unique.
Museum officials often state that if demands of repatriation are met, a floodgate effect will follow, and there will be a non-stop flow of artifacts from the museums back to the countries of origin. But this floodgate effect has never occurred.
There have been some saying that if we first start to repatriate, then there will be a floodgate of other Christians. But I think our story at least shows that it had been, as I told in the beginning, it's been part of the National Museum. We were not maybe 10 years old, I mean in the beginning of the 19th century, and they were asked, please, would you deliver some objects back to Germany? And we said yes. And there were no flood, effect. And we have been asking that occasionally, and we answer that. So I think that, of course, it's the right of the time to have this question, have this debate, and I'm welcoming it, actually, because it always shows that we are important as museums. You know, it's really matter, the physical objects, that we can access them and that we can see them, and that is a part of our story. So I don't think that there should be particular some new situation where objects suddenly, you know, there would be a lot of demand suddenly. They are there, and it's always been part of the museum history that we have this discussion: where should we place the objects, because objects have several layers of stories inherent in them.
The Rosetta Stone was looted from Egypt by Napoleon's army in 1799, only to be looted again by the British Army a few years later. Several decades later, international laws were signed declaring military looting a crime. If looting similar to the Rosetta Stone incident were to happen today, all parties involved would be tried as war criminals.
I think that the Rosetta Stone was very important for the development of the field of Egyptology. It was the gate for us to know the language through its deciphering by Champollion. My feelings about seeing it in London are that it's Egyptian, it's ours, it's just there on loan. And I believe as Egypt now, we should not really ask for immediate repatriation, because we have so many other objects that we need to take care of in Egypt at the moment, and we need the capacity and the funding to do that. But I believe that we should also have a say in how this object should be displayed, in how objects in Western museums should be displayed. My feelings in general about how Egyptian objects are displayed in the West is not as quite positive, because I see the West is always trying to show how great the Egyptians are, the gold, the glory, Tutankhamun, and all this hype of an Indiana Jones film. It's more of a treasure hunting rather than how this culture, how people lived in ancient Egypt. People, when they go to Egyptian exhibitions, they find it very hard to identify with the culture, because the way it's portrayed is very colonialist. And as an Egyptian, I would like to see a stronger connection between ancient Egypt and modern Egypt, because Western scholars many of the times insist that there's a huge divide with ancient Egypt and modern Egypt, which we Egyptian scholars really do not see. We see cultural heritage as a continuum that started 4000 BC and continues until today.
So one of the other objects in the museum's collection, again, which has been here for many hundreds of years, is the Rosetta Stone. And that was an object that was found by Napoleon's troops and then taken from Napoleon when the British defeated Napoleon and given to Queen Victoria. And it was then handed or given to the British Museum's collection, where it's been on display ever since. Obviously, the scholarly importance of it, in and of itself, it is not a particularly beautiful or fascinating object, but what really captivates you about it is obviously it holds the secret to deciphering hieroglyphics. So until that point, though there had been obviously lots of discoveries in terms of ancient Egyptian material, there hadn't been that understanding of the writing and what was actually being said and written on these texts and on the buildings. So what resulted was a decipherment of the script, of the hieroglyphic script, which was a sort of international effort. Champollion, the French cryptographer, obviously rightly takes the credit for deciphering hieroglyphics, but there were lots of other people, obviously, who were racing to try to do that. So it's a good example, I think, of the sort of global scholarly benefit of these kind of objects, where you have a big group of scholars who are racing to try and unlock the secrets of this particular and very important ancient culture.
I believe that a lot of what we suffer today in Egypt in the field of cultural heritage has to do a lot with how the field has started by the advent of Napoleon, then the following colonialists who came to pillage objects and fill their cabinets of curiosity. Egyptology particularly started as a Western science. Currently, I think that the field should move back completely in the hands of Egyptian scholars because they see heritage quite differently. They accommodate social histories of archaeological sites. The way they write history will definitely be different from how the West has written the past of Egypt. And here I'm not just speaking about ancient Egypt, but also the Coptic period, the medieval and the Islamic period. So scholars like myself who are a bit of the two worlds, I studied in Europe and I was born and lived in Egypt. I think I try to fill in the gap and create more dialogue between Egypt and the West.
Understandably, it's become a symbol of ancient Egypt, but its history is very complicated. So it's obviously been in Egypt. It's had a period of time when it's been under French guard, if you like, and then it's obviously come to the British Museum. So I think, as with all of these objects, they all have much more complicated histories than are perhaps evident on the surface. And certainly the Rosetta Stone remains an extremely popular object in terms of the museum's collection, precisely because it has enabled us to unlock those secrets of ancient Egypt. I think maybe the other thing probably to say is that there is obviously, of course, a great deal of Egyptian material in Egypt. We understand why these objects, why certain objects become symbols of particular cultures. But you go to Egypt and there are wonderful, wonderful museums, including a wonderful new one that they're building near the pyramids at Giza, showing that ancient culture. And so it's not quite the case, and it would be misleading to suggest that all of these objects have been taken out of these countries and that nothing remains and that they're all dispersed throughout the rest of the world without actually having some of that culture that remains in those countries. That's simply not true.
Yes, it comes back to the same idea that Egypt should have a say in how their cultural heritage is displayed in museums and in international museums, and also not just have a say. I believe that Egypt also should get a share from the objects, from the profits of the different museums, because these museums make huge profits, and I believe it's part of the Egyptian cultural heritage. So Egypt should also have an economic share in the different profits of these museums. I understand that many of the museums are non-profit, many of them have tickets for free, but there should be an agreement in a way. Cultural heritage belongs to everyone. Egyptian cultural heritage is not just Egyptian, it belongs to everywhere. So I believe there should be, Egypt sends exhibitions abroad which tour places, so why not we can have the Rosetta Stone come for loan for a few years in Egypt, or the other way around, we can ask for the bust of Nefertiti from Berlin. I believe that things should be more fluid, and the Rosetta Stone is in the British Museum, but it's definitely property of the Egyptian people and is part of World Heritage.
Approximately half of the Parthenon marbles are in the British Museum, and the other half is in the New Acropolis Museum. Individual pieces are scattered around the world in places such as the National Museum in Copenhagen, the Louvre in Paris, Würzburg University, the Vatican Museums, the Museum of Fine Arts in Vienna, the Glyptothek in Munich, and the Salinas Archaeological Museum in Palermo. Small fragments of the monument have been returned in the last several decades by a Swedish family, the University of Heidelberg, and the Getty Museum in Los Angeles. When the sculptures are divided, their meaning is often lost.
Here we see the mythical king of Athens, Kekrops. This is on our left. And on the right, the statue of his daughter Pandrosos. And this is the original. It is, of course, damaged. But here you see a piece, a plaster copy from the snake on which the king sits. This snake is very important because it has to do with the mythology of the Athenians, that they derived from this place. It was a symbol for the autochthony of the people living in Athens. And this piece is today in the British Museum. I don't believe that anybody can understand there what it is, but here it has a very special role. It completes the presentation on the west pediment of the Parthenon with the struggle between Athena, the goddess Athena, and Poseidon.
I am not an expert, but I represent, I suppose, a new swell, it seems to me, in the world of a kind of emotional apprehension of something which is amiss. And there's a tremendously strong feeling amongst young people, of which I am not one, but I'm one that carries the flame, having been brought up in a ex-colonial country, which went very badly wrong, but we needn't go into that. And it seems to me that the relics of colonialism have got to be addressed by a country that is now very much past its colonial sell-by date, and that's Great Britain.
Yes.
It's had it. It can no longer lay claim, certainly not to very specific things that were plundered, quite simply. And it's time the trustees of the British Museum, who must be very old and creaky by now, shifted themselves into something younger and more pertinent to the times. It seems to me they've got to re-evaluate and rethink why it is they're hanging on to something which shouldn't be here. It should be in the attic sunshine, and it should be joined to its fellows in the Parthenon Museum.
This is a very usual case. We have here an original block, but the next one is a block in plaster copy. So practically the horse is half on this block and half on the other block. But there are also other more dramatic cases. The 26th block of the north side and the 27th. You see here the head of the horses is original here. The body of the horses is plaster copy because this is today in London. The tails of the horses are again original on the Acropolis. The upper part of the next block is in London, the lower part in Athens. I mean, this is at least surrealistic. But we did it in the museum for many reasons. One reason was that it will be seen like that if we have the pieces from London. And the other is to give a complete idea of what is preserved from this so important frieze of 160 meters from the antiquity, and how we can read in one way the story on this very long frieze of the Parthenon. I mean, the continuity of the frieze is also a part of the art quality of this art piece.
The British Museum is not like most other museums. It is only like the Louvre, the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and a handful of others.
But you don't need more than a handful.
You don't, but they call themselves universal or encyclopedic museums, which give added value to their contents because each individual object or group of objects gains by being associated with other objects in the same museum.
You sound like a trustee.
Well, I'm trying to be very sort of generous towards them, but they anger me because it doesn't seem to me to be an argument that works at all. There is so much else in the British Museum that the loss of the Elgin Parthenon marbles would make no visual or real
I agree with you,
all
Paul,
of that.
absolutely down
Yeah.
the line. But if I walked into the British Museum, just an ordinary punter off the street, and I was shown into this grey and lofty room where these sad creatures are kept on plinths, boring plinths, with no emotional or visual or aesthetics around to them, how would I link them up with what they told me in school was one of the greatest building
I know,
of
exactly.
our European heritage? I wouldn't be able, but in the Parthenon Museum, I would just slide my eyes to the right, and there I would
Yes,
see the
yeah.
Parthenon standing, shining in its Attic sunlight through the window.
It's amazing,
And
isn't
here would be the
Yeah, yeah.
marbles that were once on that pediment.
And you build up to it.
Everything
by going
makes
up to
sense.
the top
It's
floor.
much more sensual. It's much
Oh.
more immediate than any argument about universality. I mean, what does that mean?
And then if I come back as an academic, the way in which they're displayed, what the Greeks have, is much more accurate and
Yes.
true to life than the British Museum's display, which distorts the positioning of all the objects.
Yes, there is always something about museums which is deadening. Objects taken from their life source. It's like dead babies or something. There's something moribund about a museum.
Somebody can say that this museum was constructed as a reaction to the position of the British Museum that the Greeks, they don't have an appropriate museum for the sculpture of the Parthenon. But this is not 100% true because this museum was constructed for both to receive eventually the marbles they are in London, but also to give a complete idea of the sculpture and the other exhibits, the other monuments they were on the Acropolis. Of course, this dialogue or the claim for the return of the marbles lasts almost 200 years. But we don't stop to continue to speak about that because in a way it is not for us, living people, but for the monument itself. It's something that like human rights for people are the rights for the monuments to be to have the integrity they deserve. And because these pieces really express important messages, we think we should continue to work on these pieces and to study and present and reconstruct. And we do that, of course, asking the British Museum for cooperation. And in this field, it is done a productive work. But the final target of all this is to reunify these so important pieces.